Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Natalie Tysdal podcast, where I cut through the noise to bring you trustworthy conversations about health, family, and personal growth. I'm Natalie, a health journalist, here to help you live well and feel your best, one real life conversation at a time. And I am so glad you are here today. In the episode, I am joined by Alicia Michelle, author, neuro coach, and host of the Christian Mindset Coach podcast. Alicia dives deep into her powerful story of overcoming a life-threatening health crisis that forced her to re-examine her push through the pain approach to life. We explore how hustle culture and perfectionism can take a toll on our minds, our bodies, our faith, and so much more, and why acknowledging our emotions instead of ignoring them is crucial for lasting change. Alicia shares the science behind emotional patterns and also offers some practical tools for calming the nervous system, and she introduces her 3-step method for managing emotions. You're going to want to hear this. Also, we're going to discuss the balance between positivity and authenticity and how faith can transform the way you process anxiety and overwhelm. If you're ready to break out of survival mode, lead with self-compassion, and model healthier emotional habits for yourself and your family, this is the podcast that you want to listen to today. And also, if gut health is something that you're focused on right now, I'm focused on it. Don't miss my free gut reset plan. Again, completely free. It's a simple science-backed guide to help you reduce bloat, support digestion, and get your energy back. You can grab that anytime at natalietysdal.com/gut reset. That's Natalie Tysdal, TYSDAL.com/gut reset. I'm excited about today's episode, so let's get started with Alicia Michelle. Alicia, thank you so much for taking the time. This is such an important topic, and I appreciate your expertise and your background and everything you bring to the table today.
Yeah, thank you so much for being willing to talk about this today and bringing in the faith and the science together to cover anxiety. I think it's going to be a great conversation.
So let's start with that.
Yeah.
Faith and anxiety. How do those things live together? Or how can we successfully live with them together?
Yeah, I think, well, anytime we struggle with anxiety or any emotion, it's important for us to be completely honest and acknowledge that it's there. And the gift that we have as believers in acknowledging and seeing what's happening with our emotions is that we get to do that in partnership with Jesus. So we have a God who cares, who's compassionate about where we've been and where we're going and what we're experiencing. And so I feel like when we approach a topic, especially one that's as heavy and honestly can be debilitating as anxiety, we can understand that we have the gift of seeing it as an opportunity to lean into our faith more, to lean into who God wants us to grow to become, and even in the relationship with Him itself.
Yeah, I think we have stories that are parallel in some ways in your lifestyle, your health, and all of that leading to where you are today, where I am today, and being in this hustle culture,
Yeah.
so busy, and then taking it took a health crisis, and you can tell us about that to realize this is not where God wants me right now, and I need to make a change. Tell us about that and how that changed your path.
Right. Yeah. In 2017, I had a unexpected major health crisis that nearly took my life. It was years in the making, but I was on a missions trip down to Mexico with our church, and I started getting this horrible headache that would not go away. There was nothing that I could take to touch it. I had never felt anything like this before. I'm somebody who, especially at that point, was like, whatever, just keep going, push through it. You're fine,
We're kinda taught that's what we should do, push through.
just push through. Like, you're here, like, we have to do this. Like, and that was really how I was. And that's how I was mentally had raised myself to be. I don't want to blame anybody for that, but that's how I was growing up. Let's just say that. And that is how I dealt with things in my life. So that happened. But then the second morning that we were there, I woke up at like 3:30 in the morning and I was in so much pain. We were staying in like a desert camp area. And I was in an RV, and I went outside into the morning air. And I very clearly felt God say, I wouldn't say I heard his voice, but I sensed this, you need to go home, and you need to go home right now. And I was like, okay, again, like, God, I have to teach a Bible study here. We were already short staffed. My daughter's here for the first time. Like, I can't go. And it was like, you need to go home and you need to go home right now. And so I said, all right, next, when I wake up in the morning, I will talk to the leader and we'll see. And so I did. And of course, he was like, go home, take care of yourself. It's okay. We'll figure it out. Got in the car, they drove me to the border. My husband met me there. And thankfully, it was a Saturday because if you don't feel well and you're in that much pain, you go to the ER. That's what you do. Normally, I would have probably been like, I'll just make an appointment for next week, right? But no, it was like, I need to do something. So they drove me straight to the ER. And the doctor said, you're having a vertebral artery dissection. We can't even believe that you're standing here, first of all. Secondly, we can't even treat you here because it's so severe. We're sending you to this teaching hospital. And what in the world were you doing in Mexico? Because the injuries that you have are in line with people who've been in car accidents, people who are
Wow.
bungee jumping. Like, what did you do to your neck? So a dissection is where a blood vessel, the aneurysm is where it bursts out. A dissection is where it collapses inward on itself. And so this one artery in my neck had collapsed upon itself and had separated the inner wall from the outer wall. So there was all this blood clots that were forming. Of course, the restriction was diminished. And I was in the hospital for a good week at that point in the ICU because I was having these trans ischemic attacks, the mini strokes. And again, they kept asking, what were you doing? And I'm like, nothing. I wasn't doing anything. But in my head, again, God was like, you know why you're here. You've been running from things for way too long. You've not been dealing with all of this stuff inside of you. Your response to all of it is just to push harder, drive faster, basically, to the anxiety, to the perfectionism, now all of this stuff. And I need to get your attention. And so you need to learn what is the root behind all of this. And so as I sat in bed for the next 9 months and could not do anything, everything was taken away from me, everything. I was homeschooling at the time, my kids, the work I was doing online, couldn't even feed myself, at some points. Because of all of that, I had a lot of time with God to really figure out there's a lot of stuff that I've been running from. And as I began doing that work, I realized what is keeping me as somebody who knows Jesus and has followed him for quite a while now. Why is it that I can know that you love me logically, but I don't know it in my heart? What is that about? Same thing with worth. Why is it that I feel like I know you say I'm worthy, but I'm still trying to prove myself? What is that about? And I realized that a lot of the women that I had been talking to and working with, they were in that same place too. So began digging into the brain science behind it. Why do we get stuck on these patterns? Eventually became certified as a neuro coach to understand the mental patterns we get stuck in and the reasons why we can logically believe something but have a different response and how we have our behavior. So through that time, again, my own healing, it transitioned to this whole season of finding other ladies who were in this same place where they needed practical tools to figure out what to do with their emotions, deeper ones like this, but also just every day. Every day, how do I deal with the anger or the overwhelm that happens in my life? And so that's the work I get to do now with women, is helping them get to the root of all of that, using very practical tools, using science, but also seeing it as, like we said in the beginning, an opportunity to connect with God through all of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow, what a story. Like, I mean, we all have wake-up calls at different levels, right? From tragedy to crisis to health things. But what do you think it's part of our culture that maybe you and I about the same age, that we grew up in this like work harder, work through it, I can't
Yeah.
say that. I mean, I did have like a very hardworking single mom
Mhm.
who she worked hard. I watched that. I learned from that. I did the same thing. I mean, I got up at 2:30 in the morning for 20 years and pushed through a lot of pain and a lot of thinking, I
Exactly.
have to do this. I got proofs. I had to
Yes.
prove something. I don't know who I was trying to prove it to of
Right.
doing this early morning newscast, but I was the one hurting physically and mentally, which means I wasn't good for everyone else around me. Do you think that that's something culturally
Mm.
that our generation grew up with?
It could be. It would be interesting to look at the era that we grew up in, which was past a lot of the women's liberation stuff, but not quite where we are at now with for women
Mm.
in careers, to kind of see, women, I think at that point we were still trying to figure out, or we still believed like I can do everything. I
Yeah.
think we were still kind of under that assumption, or at least our moms were too, under that assumption. Like, we can have it all. If we just work hard enough, you can do it all. And I do believe, yeah, we have the ability to obviously do a lot of things, but that can set us up for some pretty unhealthy
Yeah.
mindsets. But I think what you said something interesting about trying to prove yourself. I think whatever we have told ourselves over and over, that's the dialogue that's running the show. That was what was running the show for me, was that I had said, I have to prove myself the best. I have to be perfect. I have to be the perfect mom. I
Mhm.
have to reach this goal, or I'm bad, I'm wrong. I mean, once I finally began peeling it all away, that's what it was. So when that is when the subconscious mind is saying that, it's going to override what we logically know to be true. And that's what's happening for those of us who have these patterns, which are often formed between the ages of 9 to 13. When we have those patterns that are formed, and yet we logically know something different, there's a conflict. So we have to figure out what are those subconscious patterns so that we can line them up with what God's truth says, and they're no longer fighting, and we can be in harmony.
Let's talk about the neuroscience part of it. So once you realized that these things are hand in hand, that the brain has something to do with all of this, what did you learn and what advice do you have for people knowing what you know now?
I think I learned a couple of things. I first realized that understanding how our mind works, living in the era that we live in, is an incredible gift. I mean, the whole science of neuroscience is not very old. I mean, maybe 50, 60 years in the last, we've made these amazing strides to understand how the brain works because of the technology that we have. But I feel like everything else we discover in science or creation, the more we understand about it, the more it helps us understand how we relate to God. So I would say that the more you can learn about how your brain works and how the patterns that have been developed in your mind as where you're at right now, the better it's going to be for you to learn, okay, what can I do? Like, for example, I teach techniques on how to turn on the parasympathetic nervous system, which is that rest and digest side, so that we can be more calm to work through the feelings that we're having, so that we are more apt to follow God's leading versus just responding and reacting to an emotion that we're having, still seeing the emotion as real and honoring it, but not letting that be the thing that's taking over. Because when we are in fight or flight, 20% of our logical mind is online versus 80% of that survival mind. So it makes sense why we just respond and aren't thinking of the logical truths of God tells me to love, God tells me to be patient, God tells me to be these things. But if we can understand that about ourselves, we can, number one, have grace when we do have those moments where we're just like wanting to lose it, because we're saying, this is what's happening in my brain. This is a biological process I'm working through. And we can understand, how can I help myself out of it so that I can have a different response? God gave me a body that's responding in these ways, but he also gave me a mind, and he gave me his spirit to guide me towards a different response. And so learning about your brain and learning about how to respond is, like, again, I feel it's just a life skill that can be really helpful in every area.
Yeah, for us at this stage of life, but being able to model that, I talk about that so much, being able to model that so that when our kids face teenage years, early professional years, their own issues in motherhood, that they've
Sure.
learned some of those things. So let's talk about a few of those things. You mentioned the parasympathetic nervous system.
Mhm.
Give us a couple of things anyone listening today could do right away to calm their nervous system and to activate that parasympathetic nervous system to get through something difficult.
Right. Yeah. No, I affectionately call it emotional prep, because I teach a very specific 3-step method to manage an emotion called ADD. But even before we use something like ADD, it's important to get our brain in the right place, to get our nervous system in the right place, so that, again, we're using the logical brain and not just responding, and we can use something like ADD. So there are an unlimited number of those tools that we can use to turn on the calm and turn on that parasympathetic. I list like 20 of them in my book. The first one that comes to mind, and it's the easiest, most common to reach for, is box breathing. I love box breathing, and that's probably not very new and revolutionary to someone listening, but it's, you breathe in for 4, you hold your breath for 4, breathe out for 4, and hold your breath for 4. Think of it as making a box with your breath. Something simple like that. I think it's important to understand too, kind of a crossroads like question I ask myself when I'm feeling that everything kind of rise up emotionally is, do I need to expel these frenetic energy that I'm feeling, or do I need to go inward to help calm myself and put it into that parasympathetic state? So you might feel like I am so frustrated, I just need to go for a walk. I need to get out and just move this out of my body. That might be the moving it outside, which could still kick on the parasympathetic. Or you might be thinking, I need to really go inward, grab a journal, calm myself down, take some deep breaths, turn on a candle, grab a cup of tea, step outside. I might need to go that route. So it really is helpful to figure out what is it that would help me in this moment be in a place where I could really process what's happening.
Yeah, that I think that listening to your
Mhm.
body and knowing those things, but that's not easy for everyone. We
Takes
all know what it feels
practice.
like when you get ramped up and
Yeah.
you feel it, you know it. And in some ways you're like, I know I need to calm down, but I don't want to calm down. And I,
Sure. Yeah.
especially when you're having a disagreement with your teenager, like that's the
Yes.
hardest thing ever.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. No, I think part of it too is understanding, which kind of gets into this method that I teach, just understanding that it makes sense that I'm feeling this way. That's the A part, acknowledge. It makes sense I'm feeling this way because I just got off a coaching session with a mom, a young mom. I mean, two boys, ages 3 and 5. Need I say more, right? Like busy, just wanting to. We were talking through some of these managing emotions that come up, and just that feeling of it's really easy to think, well, I should just respond in love and kindness. And yeah, you should. But before we get to that, let's look at why is it reasonable that this is happening? And that is important because then we can have that compassion to be able to let ourselves listen to the way we need to respond, if that makes sense. So like it makes sense talking to my teenager is frustrating, and that's why I'm upset. Now it doesn't give me license to act however I want, but then we can say, I'm a human being living in this world and this is frustrating, and that's okay. Like it's okay to feel the frustration. God even said there would be in this world you would have trouble, take heart, I've overcome the world. So recognizing it as part of being in this world and seeing that God sees that. Not that he's saying, well, you shouldn't even get.
Yeah.
No, he sees it. He understands. So I think that's important too. But then that gives us the ability to then look at and to calm down enough to say, so what is true and what is not true? That's that second step of discern. What is true and what's not true here? Because we can let all of those things, just the emotions spin into other emotions, like with talking to a teen. Well, they're never going to listen. And then they are disrespecting me. And that means I'm a bad mom. And if I'm a bad mom, then who am I? Well, I mean, they're, like all these things. They're going to end up getting pregnant when they're 13 and they're going to run off, like all the scenarios that we go to. And it's like, okay, go back to just what is true. It's true that this, it's not true that this, right? And that kind of asking God for that clarity to help us in that moment so that we can go to the last step, which is the decide step of, so I've seen that it's reasonable. I'm feeling this way. It's true this, but it's not true this. God, what is my next step here? What do you want me to do in this situation? And where do you want me to emotionally dwell? Where do you want me just to rest? Because I may have to say something hard to this teen, or I may have to surrender this again. Where can I live so that I'm not going right back to the anxiety? I'm not going back to the stress of the emotion. What is that hopeful truth that I can live in moving forward?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, I want to talk about the positive mindset. There's this line of, and you hear this kind of catchphrase of toxic positivity.
Mhm.
Is it healthy to, and with the people that you work with, to say everything's okay when it's not okay?
Do you want me to answer that honestly?
Absolutely. Because I think it's a fine line.
Yeah.
You can't live in the negativity, but
Right.
you have to deal with the emotions, right? So
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah,
what really,
I am definitely not a fan of being super positive. I feel like there's a line, right? Like it becomes toxic when it keeps us from the reality of what's happening inside. That's when it's toxic. It's helpful, and there's a difference. It's helpful to focus on positive truth when we're going through hard times, like we just talked about with that discern step. Where will I choose to let my thoughts rest? I get to choose that. However, if I am continually just like plugging my ears and saying, I'm not going to listen, I'm not going to listen, I'm just, God is good, and I'm blah, 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 and I'm doing that so that I'm not dealing with what I'm really feeling, and then I'm creating this falseness with God or with myself or with other people, that's toxic. That's not good. And that's where I feel like right now there is a lot of emphasis on joy and positivity in the church. Now, I feel like those are great, but we have to understand that we were not designed and we aren't living in a world that's conducive to moving from one joy cloud to another. We can't expect that of ourselves. That's not the reality. That's not being honest about who we are and what's happening, and even honest before God. So I think when we're given a choice, as long as it isn't compromising the reality of the feeling and not being honest, then yes, choose positivity. But if it is, then we need to lean into honesty, even if it's hard.
Yeah. Yeah. And you hear people who they put on a smile, and there's a balance
Hmm.
of you do have to put on a smile, but I don't
Sure.
think it's always fake it till you make it.
Right.
Like, just
Yeah.
fake it and then you'll start to feel it. There's a little bit of that. You do have to wake up, and even if you're not feeling good, say, I'm going to make this a good day.
Hmm.
But you have to deal with
Yeah.
emotions that are real.
Mm.
You're feeling it for a reason.
Hmm.
And I've heard people say that before when they have an argument like with their spouse, and they say, "Well, you're just mad all the time." And then the other spouse saying, "But there's a reason I feel this way.
Hmm.
Like, I'm
Hmm.
mad because, like, where's the core of it? Get to
Hmm.
that." And sometimes that takes
Hmm.
help, right?
It does.
What are
Yeah.
your thoughts on that? Like, are we able to process usually, generally, are people able to process and figure this out on their own? I mean, I know that's how you help women,
Mhm.
but are we able to figure this out and get to the core of it without a therapist or a coach?
Of course, I think there's a place for all of it. I mean, places for coaches or therapists or your own version of working through it. And God is involved in all of those. Think like learning the skills of understanding your emotions, like knowing how to identify an emotion, what's really going on, knowing how to go to the bottom of that emotion iceberg, if you've heard that expression, knowing what that's about, being willing to be honest and to acknowledge it. Knowing a simple tool like the ADD model is something that every person should know because we all have emotions and we all need to figure out how to handle them. But there are times where we need to involve a therapist or a counselor to help us go back if there's been some sort of trauma or some sort of thing we need to work through. Absolutely, we need that. Or we need a coach to help us say, okay, in light of where you're at, what does it look like to move forward now? What is that plan with your emotions? So God is in all of it, but I do feel like we aren't necessarily taught these life skills with our emotions, but it's valuable for all of us. And being able to share that with our kids, modeling it as much as we can as we learn it, and then being able to help them learn it too is such a gift.
Yeah. I love how you incorporate faith into this because
Mm.
so don't always talk faith on the podcast. I mean, I think most of the people listening know my faith and they know how important it is to me. But
Yeah.
a lot of the experts that I talk to go straight to the science, they go straight to the medicine or to other issues. But how have you found in your life and in with the people that you work with, really incorporating? You talked about journaling, you talked about, letting God walk with you through this. You're not alone. But how else can you advise people that can help you spiritually first, mentally, and physically?
How being honest about those things can help you in those areas?
How your faith can help you
How
in
your
those
faith
other
can help
areas of
you.
your life.
Yeah. Well, again, as a person of faith, I believe that faith is not just a Sunday morning thing we do and go and have a religious experience with. We serve a creator who made everything. And that includes our bodies, that includes our minds, our thoughts, our emotions. He's made the world that we live in, the air that we breathe. And so when I think of faith, I think of it as part of every moment of every day, that especially with emotions, I think of them as these check engine lights to what's going on inside of us and opportunities to connect with a very real God in this world, maybe in ways that we wouldn't. If we are people of faith, we often say, I want to see God in the everyday. I want to know God. I want to see him show up. But what if the things you're feeling were an opportunity for you to connect with him? For you to go to him when you're feeling this anxiousness, to when you're feeling this overwhelm. That can look like traditional things like prayer. That can just be you sitting in your car, just talking aloud and asking him for help. That can be Bible time. That can be journaling. It can be a creative expression of involving him into something exciting like that. Like, I just think that it's an opportunity for relationship with God. And that's what we are after as people of faith, not a religious experience, but a relationship with God. So all of this is an opportunity to have more of that in an authentic way.
Yeah. Those I talk a lot about like those whispers we hear and we're like,
Mm.
"Oh, wait. Oh, okay, God's talking to me." You're like,
Yeah.
"I feel very good, but oh, I better go for the oh, wait a minute." Like really listening to your body, knowing that that might just be the opportunity that you mentioned where
Mhm.
God wants the relationship with you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a beautiful thing. And it's a I would say it's a thing not many people get early in life. They
Mhm.
find that communication, and that awareness
Right.
at different times in their lives.
Definitely.
But once you do, how things change, right?
It does. It helps you understand and I think appreciate a lot of things differently that our very core ways of connecting to God are his word and through prayer, worship, things like that. But that God is, we can have a quote worshipful encounter with him as we're baking bread or we're painting a landscape or we're out running. I mean, being aware of how God can be in the everyday and how our body works and how our mind works is part of the discovery of knowing him and living life well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. Where can people learn more about what you offer and where can they find you? I follow you on Instagram, but I know your other places too.
Yeah, thank you. So the best place to find everything I do is on aliciamichelle.com. You'll find my book, Emotional Confidence, there. That's where we talk about the 3-step model that I shared, the ADD model. I also have a podcast too, for those of you, since I know you're listening to a podcast right now. It's called The Christian Mindset Coach. And we talk about all things emotions from a science and scriptural perspective. But either of those places, I would say the podcast itself or the website, aliciamichelle.com. And it's ALICIA Michelle, which is normally spelled.com.
Right. I'll put links in the show notes for
Thank
anybody
you.
who didn't catch them all there. Alicia, thank you so much. Great to
Thank
talk.
you. Great to talk to you.